Hello again, I'm Stephen Jerome, and I'm going to continue reading from my third novel, The London Year. This is part 78, and we're going to get a little heavy this time. Tess never knew the particulars of my subterranean life, where I went, whom I met, what kind of sex I liked. If cheating, lying by omission, being selfish, and immoral are apt words, I was all of those as well. I never punished her for what I might have perceived as restraints on my behavior. I never intentionally hurt her, pursuing my misguided notions of being free, to quote Joni Mitchell again. I didn't want to lose Tess, not in a million years. We were right for each other on so many levels. At the same time, I pined for something else, for love with a man. Tess picked up on my shifting moods, the restlessness, headaches, and mild depression. Quite naturally, she took my distancing as rejection. But we still met for lunch in Knightsbridge once or twice a week. We'd stroll back to Harrods, where Tess might do some grocery shopping. Of course, her purchases all went back to her flat. Trust Finn to comment on the diminished treats at our place, now that I was only providing for one. But the physical space between Tess and me actually strengthened our relationship. It gave time for the little wounds to heal. To my mind, there was nothing broken. I wasn't wrong being bisexual. As for sustaining a heterosexual relationship, it was overly optimistic. Bless Tess for looking on the bright side. If not a card-carrying optimist, she stuck at things, pushed through adversity with a determined nature. But her bravery was probably as naive as me thinking I could navigate unscathed, living on both sides of the fence. We both wanted to keep what we had, the bird in hand, so to speak, but what was in the bushes would never really stop rustling. There was newfound freedom with Tess's new situation. Besides more adventurous escapades in the kitchen, there were the pleasures of her bedroom in the form of a proper double bed. We finally had more playroom, but equally rewarding, more room for a comfortable night's sleep. One night, I didn't want to stay over, because taking the tube from Notting Hill Gate to Knightsbridge the next morning was complicated. A map suggested that if I watched my time, it was actually easier for me to walk from Notting Hill to Earl's Court, where I could catch the last tube back to closest to my place. But that turned out to be the Devil's Road. Taking it the first time, I recognized the narrow, high-walled, sloping walk leading into Holland Park. It was the same cruising spot Peter and I had discovered by accident months before, where the shadows were alive against the long wall behind the trees. It was always a temptation, and sometimes I would linger, resigning myself to missed trains and a longer walk home. Or if I brisk-paced to Earl's Court, I might catch a last pint at the Coleherne. Otherwise, I'd fly down the open stairs, heading for the tube to catch the final ride before doors closing. I never missed it, except by choice. One night, having made it to the Coleherne and not yet ready to continue home, I thought I'd sample the notorious cruising street behind the pub. I'd checked it out once before, but realized there was nowhere to actually go besides getting into a stranger's car and heading to your place or mine. Mine was out of the question, so I just never went back. But on this night, as I debated the cruising cars, a clean-cut guy about 30 pulled up and suggested his place. After assuring me that it was nearby, I got in. He looked like a nice guy. All I remember is that he was very pleasant, a nurse at some local hospital, he said, and that his flat was one of many in a wide deco building with multiple floors. Details are spare beyond that for reasons I only deduced later. When we got to his flat, he offered me a drink. The next thing I remember was being let out politely to find my own way back home. Fortunately, I knew where I was, but as I walked, I felt a slight discomfort, even dampness, at my rectum. I was slow to grasp the unthinkable. But considering the hospital connection and a complete block of lost time, I realized I must have been drugged, screwed, then shown the door, all in time to never trace my footsteps back to his. Who could I tell? There was no one. If I were still with Bert and Carlos, I'd have told them everything. At least I could have vented my outrage, my disgust. Instead, I never told anyone. Forget the police. They were notoriously homophobic, and I'd only have subjected myself to their humiliating winks and snickers. It's your own fault, mate, they'd have said, and they wouldn't have been wrong. When living in the shadows, you take your chances. My real world never touched the parallel one of after-hours cruising and anonymous sex, but no encounter would be as depraved as meeting that sicko nurse who committed nothing less than rape. Wow, okay, I'll stop there. I think that's enough, and we'll continue again tomorrow. Thanks for following along. Bye-bye.